The Alberta Legislature came to an end for this summer, and it wrapped up last Friday after a marathon 40-hour filibuster from the NDP over Bill 8, the Education Bill. One of our regular contributors is Tyler Dawson, who's the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, who joins me now from Saskatoon, and he's been covering that story. So Tyler, what was the final verdict?
The final verdict was the bill passed. The final verdict was it was a very, very long filibuster. I had some friends who happened to be down in Stampede shortly after that, and they said that some of the members of the legislature were really, dragging themselves around after that. So this was, as viewers will remember, this was a really contentious bit of legislation. This is the one that dealt with gay-straight alliances, among other things. And so it was maybe the most heated bit of legislating that happened during the several weeks that the legislature sat in the spring here. So it all wrapped up. Bill passed. The members are off to a well-deserved summer break, I suppose.
Now, the UCP say it passed, 13 pieces of legislation and fulfilled or nearly fulfilled about 55 platform promises in that 7-week legislative session. Tyler, it was a busy session that started with a carbon tax repeal.
Yeah, that's right. That was the big promise that the UCP had made on the election campaign. It was the very first thing they did. So by now, perhaps folks are noticing it at the gas pumps on their heating bills, perhaps. So that was a big one. There were many things that changed, not all of them enormous. Tourism, for example, came under the purview of the economic development minister. I don't think anyone would say this was an earth-shattering change, but it was a campaign promise, and the UCP fulfilled it. So, we've got a whole bunch of other stuff that came along. Some of the war room stuff was announced. Some of the public inquiry stuff was announced. You have decisions made on a legal challenge to the federal carbon tax. Jason Kenney's been, all over the country talking about Alberta and doors open for business, all that kind of stuff. So, it was a very busy session, and I can't help but think that Jason Kenney himself probably set the pace for this sort of thing. He's a frenetic fellow and is always really running around, and his staff are trying to keep up with him. And you kind of get the sense a little bit that maybe legislators were being swept along by him as well in this.
Yeah, I've never met a politician with so much energy. He's like the Energizer Bunny. And Alberta's open for business, and he's going to show everybody, the fact that we're open for business now. Now, a big part of what the UCP focused on was also red tape reduction, speaking of businesses, which they say will help small businesses thrive.
Yeah, that's right. And there's been this launch of a website sort of thing where, members of the public can submit issues they have with red tape, a public consultation without maybe the logistical difficulty of sitting in a room with a bunch of people. But the idea is that regular Albertans can say, look, this is a really irritating bit of red tape that we've got. Maybe you'll consider cutting it. And so that is part of what they are doing now through the summer here. And I would assume that once everyone is back in the fall for the next round, that we'll start to see some movement on those sorts of things.
Now, Jason Kenney met with the Western premiers a few weeks ago, and now again in Saskatoon, where you are. Kenney recently announced that Alberta will unilaterally drop half of its exceptions to the 2017 Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Tyler, what will that look like?
Yeah, so interprovincial free trade is sort of that would be, I would say, is the theme of this year's Council of the Federation meeting here in Saskatoon. All the premiers talking about reducing trade barriers between provinces, labor mobility between provinces, how can Canadians ship and sell products to each other and get contracts with each other without all these loopholes to jump through. So the announcement that Kenney made on Wednesday is that there's going to be the unilateral, so just Alberta is getting rid of basically procurement contracts that the Alberta government has. So this will mean that companies from all over Canada can bid on procurement contracts with the government of Alberta. The idea, of course, is that if you have more competitors in the pool, that will bring the pricing down on these things and bring the quality up. You'll get more bang for your buck, and it should, in the long term, save taxpayers money. There is sort of a sunset on this. It looks like they can reevaluate down the road. So it's sort of unclear what the long-term effect of this is going to be. And certainly it is just Alberta for the time being. Perhaps this will drag other premiers in the same direction, but for now it's just Wild Rose country that's doing this.
Now, the UCP government also announced that it was rewarding responsible ranchers with longer leases. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's right. So that was another Wednesday announcement that came out, and the idea is that there's going to be a set of guidelines that come out in coming months that as to what constitutes sort of environmentally exemplary care of land, water, and air. And farmers and ranchers that meet that threshold can get up to 20 years on their leases. So more details certainly to come on that in coming months, but no doubt around Lethbridge, that's going to be one that folks are watching quite closely.
Yeah, a lot of farmers and ranchers around here, definitely. Tyler, for the first time in many years, we're seeing a blue wave rolling across Canada. We have Conservative premiers in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario. The list goes on. Now, the federal election is coming up October 21st. What might this actually look like for Justin Trudeau?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think one that a lot of commentators are watching quite closely. As you mentioned, there's a whole bunch of Conservatives. Some of these are new governments, Alberta and Ontario, for example. Some of them are less new. You know, Scott Moe in the Saskatchewan Party and Brian Pallister in Manitoba. He's actually got an election coming up in September. So, but there is this large block of Conservatives. And what that means for the federal Liberals, I think, is they have to sort of discern whether or not, you know, the fact that New Brunswick has a Conservative premier, does that mean that they're going to vote for the federal Conservatives? And so you get the sense that they are working very, very hard to paint Andrew Scheer as, you know, Stephen Harper 2.0, and which the Liberals would obviously see as a bad thing, and trying to sort of make the Conservatives federally out to be not the choice that folks want to make federally, even if they have perhaps already made that choice provincially. We're talking a big swath of the voting population here that's swung Conservative. So and you know, in the last little while, we've seen the Trudeau liberals really stumble and sort of neck and neck with the Scheer Conservatives in the polls. So it's a long way out, and I could be eating my words in a few months. But you know, when you look at these sort of trends, you can't help but wonder how the Liberals are going to pull this thing off if they're planning on winning this.
Let's talk about that connection, though, Tyler, about the provincial Conservatives with the federal counterpart. I mean, Andrew Scheer has been rumored to be distancing himself a little bit from Doug Ford in Ontario because of all the cuts that he's making right now. And Ford is apparently not very popular with a lot of Ontario voters. So is maybe that a good thing for Scheer?
Yeah, I think it probably is a good thing for Scheer. I mean, in Ontario, I think you could fairly say that you've got such huge urban populations there, but then all these massive rural ridings as well. That I can't imagine you're going to see a whole ton of votes go Conservative in, you know, downtown Toronto. But you do have these sort of suburban areas where
The 905, yeah.
Exactly, where Conservatives have historically done quite well. So I think, you know, every Conservative who wins a victory right now tries to downplay any cuts they're going to make, any tough choices that are going to have to be made, because you're competing against folks who aren't making those same promises, and nobody comes out of making those cuts super popular, necessary or not. So whether one agrees with what Doug Ford is doing or not, he's certainly chosen a hard path to walk here, and no doubt Scheer does not want to be walking that path with him right now when there are so many voters in Ontario.
But how about Kenny with Scheer? There's still that close relationship there. Have you seen that?
Yeah, it seems to be a close one. You know, Kenny has backed Scheer sort of for a long time. He's promised to campaign for Scheer against Justin Trudeau. You know, it incensed Maxime Bernier enough that he went out and said, you know, Kenny picked the wrong guy. Scheer's not a Conservative. He should, you know, come and support me. And I can't imagine Jason Kenney is going to be doing that anytime soon. So that they are certainly, you know, that sort of pragmatic Conservative bent, I think. And they're both political veterans in a way that, with all respect to Doug Ford, Ford isn't. He's reasonably new to this game on the provincial and federal scale. And that, I think, is also an explanation to some of his stumbles, and one of the reasons why Kenny is unlikely to make the same ones.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up People's Party of Canada leader Maxime Bernier saying that Andrew Scheer is a fake Conservative and Jason Kenney shouldn't align himself with Andrew Scheer. But I'm thinking to myself, is that just sour grapes from Maxime Bernier because he didn't win the leadership?
It certainly would be a fair criticism, I think. Maxime Bernier, he's tracking to the right of the Conservative Party, sensing an appetite for it. I think he's right to some extent that there is an appetite for this, but I think he's mistaken in thinking it's the appetite that he thinks it is, in the sense that sort of the really vitriolic anti-immigration stuff, really poor vetting of candidates, all sort of controversial things have come up in the last little while. So, Jason Kenney is certainly not going to abandon a guy who's campaigning on many of the similar things that Stephen Harper did, that the Conservative Party of Canada has a long record on. And Maxime Bernier is sort of taking the snitch line sort of paranoia and running with it. And he's on to something, but it's certainly not what he thinks it is, I think.
And if you look at the numbers nationally, where's the PPC running? Maybe 3-4% of the popular vote? I mean, it's quite small now, isn't it? Yeah.
If that, for sure. They have not had impressive showings in any of the by-elections they ran candidates in.
Now, Tyler, the inquiry into foreign funding landlocking Alberta oil has kicked off, and we won't know the results for, about a year? What may the results of the findings be?
Right. So this is going to be looking at any source of money coming into Canadian environmental organizations from basically the United States. So this is the tar sands campaign would be sort of the specific campaign that came up. Tom Steyer, who's recently announced that he's going to try running for president, was another name that came up, sort of a billionaire U.S. philanthropist. So it's going to be looking into the finances of all these organizations, where it came from. It's a $2.5 million inquiry. And one of the interesting things about this is we actually know a lot of it already from sort of previous charitable filings and research done by Vivian Krause mainly. So I think the question that a lot of reporters had was, what new are we going to see out of this? And it will report back next July 2nd, I believe, is the official date. But what it's going to do, if there's any benefit of it, even if we don't get a whole bunch more information, is it's going to bring everything together in, a neat little package. And Steve Allen, who is an accountant who is heading this thing up, does have power under the Inquiry Act to compel testimony, compel documents, things like that. The catch, of course, is that ends at Alberta's borders. So he should be able to get things from organizations based here, people based here. His power really is a little bit more limited. He can't, walk into the United States and say, hello, produce a bunch of documents that show you cut checks. So it's great PR, no doubt. It's going to be very useful in terms of collecting all of this in one place. I think it certainly remains to be seen just how extensive this thing can be at the end of the day.
Well, what recourse would Alberta have, the government of Alberta? Will there actually be court challenges, maybe against the Rockefellers? I mean, what can the government of Alberta actually do with this?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's not totally clear yet, I don't think. There does seem to be some sense that there could be provincial regulations in some regard on financing political activities with foreign money. A lot of this power rests with the federal government, though, in terms of charitable and nonprofit organizations and how they are involved in political activities. So the ball's really in their court. Now, Jason Kenney did sort of speculate that maybe there will be lawsuits. Maybe you could have a tort against a U.S. company or organization saying, oh, you've harmed our business interests, you've slandered our reputation. Perhaps that is a thing. Certainly, I think part of this inquiry is going to come back with some answers to those questions. And so there will be, hopefully, a little more official, concrete sense of what can happen next.
Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining me from Saskatoon. Thanks again, Tyler, and we'll talk to you again in the fall.
Thanks so much.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.